So I did have a long birth. Like I was in labor for like 36 hours, which they say is somewhat normal.
No.
Um, but the thing is that for several hours while I was in labor, I knew and I felt like she was stuck. Like I could feel there was something there that wasn't right. So I kept telling them for hours leading up until she was actually born that she was stuck. Something wasn't right. I was uncomfortable. I felt her just like stuck basically. And they had me move and, oh, move this and let me put pressure on your back and do that. And this was already like, I don't know, hours and 12, 15 hours after I was in labor. Like I was already, like there at that point, I really should have gone to the hospital. And had in hindsight, I wish I would have advocated for myself and said, hey, this is, something's not right. I know something's wrong and I need to go to the hospital. Now, in their notes, when they, after the aftermath of everything, they put in their notes that they had offered for me to go to the hospital, and I refused because of all the time and effort I'd already put into home birthing. I didn't want to go to the hospital, which is complete bullshit. Completely not true, because had they said, hey, let's go to the hospital, I had no problems going to the hospital. It was not a diehard, like, I need to have this home birth or nothing. It was, they were there because if things were to go wrong, they were to monitor me. And if things were to go wrong, next step was go to the hospital. This was my first child. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know, exactly how birth was supposed to be. They were supposed to be the people who were taking care of me, my care providers, my medical professionals. And they failed me because they didn't tell me to go to the hospital. They didn't say, hey, you've been in labor a long time, you're uncomfortable. It's just, let's go check on this baby. Also, you are 40 weeks and 6 days. You're 250 pounds at this point. You know what? This could be a big baby. You've been laboring for 30 something hours. It's time to go to the hospital.
Okay, so you were laboring for a long time. That is, by the way, long, even for a first-time mother. So you're laboring, and now you know that they are supposed to be monitoring you, and they're supposed to be monitoring the baby. And how much of that do you remember happening?
So, okay, so I started laboring the night before, right? And I called them, I let them know. And so I was just kind of like in labor for like almost a day or whatever. Then nighttime rolls around, is like 10 o'clock or so. And I text the midwives that I'm, having some pains and I'm kind of, I'm in labor. And they're texting me and I'm like, I don't want to text these people. I was kind of pissed off that they were like texting me. So I call the midwife, and this is the midwife who I only saw one time. She ended up being the midwife who was on call during my birth. I called her because I'm in labor. I don't want to text. So she said, oh, drink some magnesium, have a glass of wine, try to relax. And I'm like, okay, one, I'm not drinking. Two, I'm like, oh, you want me to relax? And just starting, labor, and I'm home and I'm like, so I'm like, okay, whatever. So I hung up and I was kind of just irritated by that. That was another thing I was irritated by. Because I don't know this person. One of the things about home birth is you're supposed to get to know your provider, and it's supposed to be like this, experience of them getting to know you over the next 9 months. And I met her one time very early on, so there's that. So I try to relax. I a couple hours go by. It's about, I don't know, 2 a.m. I start throwing up quite a bit. I call my friend to come over to help my husband because I'm like puking, and he's kind of like, oh my God, by himself, not knowing what to do. So we call my friend to come over. We call the midwives. We let them know, I'm vomiting and my husband needs help. And it's like time for you guys to come over. And so when a student showed up who I never met, and come to find out, she actually wasn't even like certified at all. She was still, I was one of her, you know, practice people. So she showed up, I think around like 2:30 or 3 a.m. She showed up before the actual trained certified midwife showed up. I was actually in the birthing tub at that point. My husband's trying to boil water and put water in this birthing tub, and I had finally stopped throwing up. She came in, she checked my temperature, checked my heart, I think, and checked the baby. Did like the monitor on the baby, the sonogram or heartbeat thing. Sorry,
Doppler.
And so everything seemed fine with that. I moved out of the bathtub and like went to the room because the birthing tub was just too cold. Anybody who wants to do a birthing, like, it's a terrible idea. The birthing tub is just, the water's not warm enough. It was absolutely terrible for me. So I got out of that. And I was in and out like of the bathroom laboring. So finally, I think around like 5 a.m., 4:30, 5 a.m. So a couple hours after the student showed up, the midwife showed up. And the
Did
student
she check when she walked in?
I was just going to say, the student was the one who was checking me the entire time.
The actual midwife never checked you?
No, not until about 10 in the morning did the midwife say, okay, can I do can I check your cervix? And I said, okay, yes, please do. And apparently it was very inflamed, like very swollen and painful. And she had to like press down to do something in there. And that was like the worst pain I felt in a long time. And I don't even think I was, I wasn't fully dilated. I don't know. She didn't mention anything about that, but whatever she did, she pressed down something. It hurt a lot. It was said, she didn't tell me how much I was effaced, or I don't remember any of those numbers. I don't think she even said anything.
Did you find that, and did they make any notes later? Did you find out?
I looked at the notes and there weren't any, like, there were notes. Mom is on the toilet, like mom is on the toilet. Mom is laboring on the toilet. Mom is off the toilet. Mom moved to the bed. Mom moved from the
I'm sure that was really useful when you were transferred to the hospital.
Yeah, mom's using got out of the birthing tub and went to the bed and whatever.
So nothing about effacement, nothing about dilation.
No.
So anyhow, in my fantasy world, where you have a home birth with a qualified provider, you call and you say, I think I'm in labor. And they say, okay, I will come and check. And then they come and they check and they, make observations, and then they decide whether or not you're okay to continue laboring alone. Maybe you're just in early labor or whatever. And then they keep in touch, and they don't text you, and they actually show up and do their jobs. So they, one, did not show up. Two, texted you, probably did not ask you any pertinent questions other than how long your contractions were.
They said, oh, you're able to talk fine. You're okay. Drink the magnesium, drink the wine, and text us later.
Yeah, that's pointless.
And that was already after, like, I was in labor so I started labor the night before. So I was already in labor like 24 hours, and then another, they didn't show up until it was after at least 20 hours or so that they showed up, if my timing is correct. So I wasn't in super labor. I wasn't like super labor, but the labor had started early on.
You were post-dates. So you're at additional risk for having problems, which they may never have told you and probably won't. So they should have been monitoring you. You were a first-time mother. They should have been monitoring you. They actually sent somebody, which is better than nothing, who did actually at some point monitor you. So that's good. But you didn't have a cervical check until the actual midwife showed up. So
yeah, and that was at 10 a.m. when the actual midwife showed up at 5 a.m. She showed up at 5 a.m. She didn't give me a cervical check until 10 a.m. And then I had the baby at like 12:30. So there was a huge lapse of like time where I was even checked. And at some point, I mean, the certified midwife never checked me. She never listened to my heart. She never checked my vitals. It was only the student. And at one point, I believe the student did not know whether she was hearing my heartbeat or the baby's heartbeat. I think she honestly didn't know. And, there should have been a little, and sometimes the midwife was in the other room while the student was checking me. And I feel like should not be allowed.
No, if you have a student midwife there, they should be supervised because they are the student.
Exactly.
And this is an opportunity for them to learn. And you assume that if someone's supervising them, they could offer guidance on what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, if there's a better way to do something. So basically what they did was let you labor unmonitored completely for a long period of time, sent a student midwife to take care of you without supervision, had a midwife show up, and then didn't supervise the student midwife.
Correct.
Is that about right?
Yes. So, and then also what kind of blows my mind is that I had the baby on a Wednesday. My last appointment with the midwife was on a Monday. And I was already 40 weeks and 40 days then, right? And she's like, okay, so if you don't go into labor this week, by next Monday, go to the OBECC and have them, check you out and scan you. I'm thinking, okay, well, I didn't think about that day. I didn't think about it until later, that had I waited that whole week, I would have been 40, 41, almost 42 weeks. If I had not gone to if I didn't go into labor and I waited until that next Monday to go get checked out, that is just really poor medical advice. And I just how is that okay for these midwives to, I don't think an OB would ever be okay unless the OB was monitoring you really well. I don't think that is or should be a good practice to.
It isn't. Once you go past 41 weeks, if they want to wait further, then you should be have your twice weekly at least and a non-stress test to make sure everything's okay with the placenta and the baby. So they were willing to let you go for a full week without any visits or any monitoring.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. I wasn't set for any stress tests, but I guess I was still under the age. Once you get a little bit older, they send you for those stress tests or whatever. But I wasn't quite at that age yet, geriatric age, where I needed to have that monitoring. But that just blows my mind when I think about it now, that they were just so I can't find the word, just not very poor care, really, when you think about it. It's just it's scary. So and also being that I was bigger and I was already kind of overdue, they should have been a little bit more cautious and said, you know what, maybe today you should go to the OBECC and get checked out just to make sure everything's okay. Just so we can scan the size of the baby and make sure, you don't go too far.
Were they doing the fundal height measurements all along?
Yes, but they used the measuring tape, and they were inconsistent with the measurements. One time it was 37, one time it was 38, one time it was back down to 37. So it wasn't actually consistent towards the end. And I was it's not always consistent or something. Which,
if it's the best you have, you better do a good job with it.
Yeah. And it was, thinking about that now, I'm like, how are they so inconsistent with that?
You measure the top of your pelvic bone all the way up to the top of the fundus. That's it. That's right. It. That's all you're doing. It's not very difficult. It's not very complicated. Measuring with ultrasounds, that's complicated, requires training. This doesn't. Were you ever measuring ahead?
No, they never told me I was. Nope. Never mentioned it.
Did you feel like you were carrying big at all?
Yes. And so I did bring that up. I did say, you know, because when I look back to like my last periods and stuff like that, and I know that can't be 100%, but um, there was one point where I wasn't sure because my periods were like just a little off. And it was like maybe a month or so before I was due. Oh, well, you know, we have a little bit of this one. This due date says March 5th. This due date says March 10th. We have about a week of wiggle room here. So, you know, and I'm like, you have a week of wiggle room. So I could have been, you know, measuring even more. So that's why I say I could have been actually almost 41.6 weeks when I gave birth to a 10-pound, 6-ounce baby. So, but they're, you know, they gave me that wiggle room of, oh, you know,
Things
which,
that let me put it this way, things that OBs don't do. There's actually guidance, if you can look it up on the internet, that says if there's a discrepancy between last menstrual period and measurements by ultrasound and it's this big, then you can adjust it. Otherwise, you go with this as the due date, no changes, no wiggle room. No, definitely not talking about wiggle room with OBs. They just say this is your due date. And if they have a reason to change it, they do. And if not, it's your due date in perpetuity.
yeah, it was towards the end where, oh, you know, I hadn't had a scan for, you know, I had my 20-week scan for the anatomy and the you know, all the, make sure everything's healthy, the brain and all that. So yeah, so it's towards the end where she's like, oh, well, you know, we have some wiggle room to work with. We have about a week. If you can go over, you can go over, you have a week to go over and this and that. And I'm just, you know, I was kind of like, well, I didn't necessarily really want to go over. Like I was big and I was uncomfortable. And I was like, you know, I guess if I had the option, I wouldn't have minded being induced early. Like I just, but I felt like I had to stick it out. I had to, you know, was having this home birth and they didn't give me any other options. So I kind of felt like, you know, I wish I had spoken up a little bit more and been like, I'm ready. I should have just taken myself to the OBCC and, you know,
Well, okay.
gotten real medical help.
Did you actually ever think seriously about, hey, maybe I could go to the OB? Or was that just never on your radar?
So I, in the beginning of my pregnancy, I had actually looked into some OBs that I was planning on going to. And one of the offices was the one I ended up with I ended up after my baby was born and I was actually recommended to them. But yeah, I wasn't like afraid to go to the doctor or afraid to have doctor care, or that wasn't something that I was against. Like some people are like, oh, you know, I'd never go to an OB. I was open-minded to that. But I guess because the care that I was given at that time, and I felt like my pregnancy was pretty well going okay. For the most part, I didn't have any major complications during my pregnancy. I was kind of following their guidance of, you know, basically, but you know, there wasn't a whole lot of guidance. They have me go there. We would talk for a little while. They would measure me, and then, you know, I'd be on my way. There wasn't like a whole lot of anything. I didn't feel like they provided anything more than an OB or anything, you know, like, I don't know. But I kind of wish I would have pushed myself to maybe go to I even did a hospital tour. My husband and I, we did a hospital tour, you know, like we went to the OBECC to check it out and we did a whole tour and things because I wasn't dead set on having, I wanted a home birth, but I wasn't dead set on like, that's the only option, you know, like I did a hospital tour in case I ended up there or in case, you know, something happened. I wasn't like, you know, home birth or nothing. So, but I wish I would have taken it upon myself to say, you know what, my body doesn't feel so good. Maybe I should get checked out. I'm already so many weeks. Like maybe I shouldn't listen to them. I'm 40 something weeks. I should just go get checked out. In hindsight, I wish I had done that. And even during labor, I knew something was wrong. I wish I just said, F this. let's go to the hospital. I don't like these. They're not doing anything for me. They're not helping me the way I feel like they should be helping me. At some point, I just felt so frustrated because instead of sitting in the corner, like whatever they were doing, I felt like they should have been doing more. And I wasn't happy with what was happening. And I kind of wish I would have just said, okay, I'm done. Take me to the hospital. This is not right. Something's not right.
So your husband was there the whole time, right?
Yes.
How was he coping?
So I remember I kept saying to him, like this was probably between like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. I was saying to him, this is crazy. This is crazy. Like something's not right. This is crazy. And he's like going back talking to the midwives, like, you know, she's feeling this, and they're like, oh, well, that's normal, you know, it's normal to labor this long. It's normal to have these feelings as a first time mom, you know, things are fine. But you know what? Things were not progressing quite right. And because I felt like she was stuck, I think I was forcefully pushing when I shouldn't have been. Like I wasn't having the right contractions or whatever, and I felt like she was stuck. So I was kind of forcefully pushing, and I told them that I was pushing, and I felt like pushing, and they didn't tell me not to. And I don't know if my forcefully trying to push when I shouldn't have been had anything to do with her getting stuck and having the shoulder dystocia because I was pushing when maybe I shouldn't have. I don't know, but because I felt like she was stuck, you know, I kind of just like was trying to push this baby out. So, but my husband was there, and he was supportive, but he was kind of going by what they were saying. And I guess because I was handling the pain and handling things okay, we just kept going the way we were going.
I have a question. Did anyone tell you that vomiting can be a sign of transition?
They told me it was normal. They told me it was completely like, oh, that's your uterus working or whatever. It's completely normal.
Exactly. I never got to transition. I vomited very early in labor. Of course, I had a lovely meal before I came to the hospital. That probably has something to do with it. But yes, when you go to transition, frequently women vomit who have been absolutely fine through labor up until that point, vomit. So you were in, I mean, from what you're telling me, and someone else can correct me, I'm happy to be corrected. You were in early labor, then you were in active labor, and about the time that the student midwife showed up, were you vomiting at that point?
Yes, I had like a little bit of vomit there, and then it stopped. It was
so you were probably, and you said you were very uncomfortable. Yeah, when the head enters your pelvis, never been there. Yeah, I can imagine. Most people can feel the change. So, and it's rarely comfortable. And you were pushing. So I would say that you were probably in transition and you were probably pushing. And bless you for even wanting to think it. No, you didn't do anything wrong by pushing. That's part of the process. But what was wrong is someone should have, I mean, the minute you start pushing, this is the most critical time of the entire birth, generally speaking, and you should have had someone watching you and watching the baby the whole time to make sure that things were going well. And you had the most stereotypical hiding out in a corner midwife when she should have been right there on top of everything.
No, she wasn't. And come to find out later, she actually had a mishap with another baby where she had her license taken away for a while. And yeah, so she had some history, which I wasn't aware of at that time when she showed up at my house. I didn't find that out until later.
Did you get any information on your placenta at the hospital?
Yeah, so I had a really excellent nurse, and she ended up showing me the placenta, which I thought was really cool. She said I had a beautiful placenta. She said it was perfect, and like the cord was really nicely colored, and it was a in her words, I had a beautiful placenta.
So there was nothing wrong with the placenta. Everything was good there.
Yeah.
Okay. Because one way that, the main way that going post-dates is dangerous is the placenta can lose function and put everything in danger. So in your case, yeah, everything was going gangbusters right up until birth.
What did happen with labor? So you've had a long labor. They're obviously not checking you. You're saying that baby's stuck. And what happened?
So they were checking me as far as like the student midwife was on, like she checked my blood pressure. She was checking, listening to the baby's heartbeat. She was doing those types of checking. So she was checking, but the midwife wasn't checking, or the midwife was in a different room. The actual midwife was in a different room, while the student was checking. So it's like there's so much that could go wrong with that too. It's how many births has this student been to before mine, and so yeah, I was in labor for so many hours. The student was checking. I didn't get checked though. Like my cervix and all that was not checked until hours after they were there. And it wasn't like a first thing, okay, let's check you right away and see how things are progressing when they first showed up. No, it was hours later. So it was at least like 6 hours after the actual midwife showed up that she did an internal check. So, and then she had to like wipe, I guess I wasn't completely, I don't know. She had to like move something, or I don't know what it's called. Move something, press down. She pressed down on something, and it was super painful. And I don't know, that at that point I was like.
So what she was probably doing is you had a cervical lip.
Yeah.
Because
okay,
the
yes.
baby's head isn't basically square, is coming in at a slight angle. And so the cervix, all but one portion of the cervix thins out and gets out of the way, and the rest of it's just hanging out there. And so this is the theory, I'm not sure how often it works. You push down on that little bit of cervical lip to get the baby's head to get past it. And from what I've heard, it hurts like the devil.
That was horrible pain. Yeah, absolutely horrible. It was just as painful as an unmedicated episiotomy, 4th degree episiotomy that I had. It was painful.
Was she born at home?
Yes.
Did you end up having her?
Yeah. So I went through, so that was like 10 o'clock when she finally checked me, 10 in the morning. They pushed down on my cervix. I kept telling them still, I feel like she's stuck. Something's not right. Okay, move this position, move that position. And then at some point, I was getting more into active labor and things were kind of moving along a little bit. But at one point, the midwife was checking, not the midwife, the student was checking the baby's vitals. And my husband was like holding on to me or holding my back or doing something. And there was a moment where the student, like, you could tell her face kind of went a little blank, and she looked at my husband, and I didn't see it because I wasn't looking at her. But she looked at my husband looked at her, and there was like a moment there. Now in hindsight, that like, I think that she knew something was wrong, or didn't hear a heartbeat, or there was something that, we should have gone to the hospital right then. But we just kept proceeding along like, nothing was the matter. But that was like, I think a point that the baby actually was in distress, and she kind of noticed something but didn't say anything about it, or didn't like be like, okay, let's change course here, let's go to the hospital, or so yeah, eventually things progressed. The baby was coming out, the baby was blue, and at that point, that's when I had to, like, I don't know, turn around, get in some type of lunging position, and they did, the baby was stuck. So they did a 4th degree episiotomy, cut, from V to B, cut a hole, they pulled the baby out. The baby was limp and blue and never took a breath. And the sad part is that, the whole thing is the part that when they were trying to, do CPR on her, they literally were tapping, doing chest compressions that were tapping, they did not know what to do. They had just gotten their CPR certification online without ever, actually practicing in real life or on people or on anything, right? It was just an online certification and that's it. Because when the EMT showed up, the guy, the way he was actually and those seconds of them maybe trying to revive her the way he did, maybe could have saved her or something, but by that, they had no idea what they were doing. And those seconds, in minutes, just mattered, and so you can tell that training right there was not good training. They had the oxygen, they had the mask on the baby. They tried to put some oxygen on the baby. They didn't even have the oxygen tank on. And we're my friend was well, don't you need to turn this on? And it's just, they had under, emergency situation, they had no idea what they were doing. They had no idea what they were doing from the beginning, but specifically under an emergency situation, they had no idea what they were doing. And it was really, I'm just laying there. They just pulled this baby out. Next thing you know, I'm surrounded by, firemen and EMT, and they're trying to assess the situation. And they pick this baby up and they're just doing these heart compressions and trying to get the baby revived. And, she came out already gone because she was stuck for so long because I kept telling them she's stuck. And by the time they actually did anything, it was too late. And then the reviving measures were a joke, honestly. It was a joke. And that's one of the vivid things that I remember most is my baby laying there, the two of them, Dumb and Dumber, trying to have no idea what they're doing with this baby, and it's just, it's so sad that it had to be like that it, there's so many red flags and so many opportunities that could have changed the course of my baby's life at that point that that didn't happen, and it's really sad. And one thing in the when we got to the hospital, the neonatologist was okay, well, your daughter had shoulder dystocia, which is where the shoulders get stuck, and she must have run out of oxygen while she was stuck. In the 8-week or 6-week birthing class that we have to take through the birthing center, everyone has to take a birthing class, teach you not necessarily how to breathe, but things that can happen during birth and whatever. The typical classes that you're supposed to take, they do briefly touch on shoulder dystocia, and they say, oh, well, it's so simple, and it's so, you just, if the baby's stuck, you just, you can put your hands there and you can pull them out, and they make it sound like it's no big deal at all, and it's very rare. Well, actually, when you look at the numbers, it's 1 in 200 births are shoulder dystocia, which is not that rare. And it's also very, very scary. And doctors and OBs will tell you how scary it is. And so for them to be not that big of a deal, you just do this and that. I was blown away that, at that time while they're telling me this in this, class, I'm oh, okay, it's not something I necessarily need to worry about. And I'm only, less than 5 miles from the hospital. If anything happens, that's not how it works either. It's not how it works. So that's so much misinformation there, just even from the beginning, and being 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 3 minutes from the hospital, it's just being next door from the hospital, even across the street is too far in some instances.
How did the midwives that were there, how did they respond to you in the immediate kind of hours and minutes following after your daughter had been born? How were they? Like, yeah, I guess that was my next question.
Well, they were terrified. You could tell that they had no idea what they were doing. They were terrified. They've never had anything like that happen before. And so, but basically, after my daughter was born, EMT, emergency, firefighters and the EMT showed up and basically moved them out of the way and, took the baby to the ambulance and, tried to spend however long. I mean, the ambulance was there she was in the ambulance for quite a while. They were trying to, save her life in there. And they, unfortunately did not. But they moved, once they showed up, the midwives were like in the corner or whatever, just like in disbelief. So, and then after I ended up going to the hospital, the midwife, who was actually the one who I spent most of the time with, who I thought would end up being at my birth, was reaching out to me and trying to call me. And obviously the last thing I wanted to do was talk to any of them from the birthing center. I was just upset how I ended up getting the midwife that I had, how I didn't get the midwife that I had spent so much time with. And then, my baby dying, obviously the last thing I want to do was talk to any of them.
Oh, did you get repairs at the hospital?
Yes. Yeah. So they put me in the ambulance. They were like hooking me up to some IVs and stuff. And then I got to the emergency room. And then they wheeled me up and brought me to a separate room. And there was about an hour and a half of repairing done there. Yeah. So I needed quite a lot of stitches and repair. And then I stayed for the hospital for another 2 days. And
it's real bad. Are they allowed to do episiotomies out of a hospital down there? Do you know?
I guess so. I mean, that's what they did. So, and they had the tools to do it, but yeah, so they are allowed.
Yeah. I was just wondering, because our state is only OBs can do them. So even if you're in the hospital and there's like a nurse midwife or a nurse, they're not even allowed to do them. It's only OBs are allowed to do them. And I'm guessing for exactly what you just said, because the repair aspect of it can be really bad. So you have to know what you're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So they are allowed to do repairs. Like if you tear, I know that they are allowed to do that, but I mean, I don't even think I had a highly skilled surgeon repairing my 4th degree episiotomy, which I can't imagine having one of them try to fix that, like that's scary in itself, like thinking that they're allowed to do, oh, let's just stitch you up, like, I don't know.
I've heard some horror stories from people even right here and all over the US that have had tears during home birth or at birth centers, and they just stitch them up, or they'll like put stuff on it and they don't stitch them up, and they'll tell, we've heard, and just hold your legs together, and I'm like, oh my God,
that's horrifying. And there's so much like horrifying information, like once you've already been in the situation and and you're aware, there's like so much horrifying stuff that it's like, how could I even imagine having a baby at home? And like how disgusting it is when you think about it, how like unsterile, and just how like, I didn't really think about those things. I mean, I guess maybe I didn't really think it all that through when I, thought I wanted to have a home birth. But like now, when I see pictures or hear somebody had a home birth, like I'm just so, and I'm thankful they had a healthy baby or whatever, but it just makes me cringe so much. I'm just like, it's just, yeah.
well, as a first time mom, we don't know. And then they tell us, like, you go to the hospital and there's all these germs from all these different, you're going to get checked out by all these people. But then you don't think about like your midwives and whoever comes in, their assistants, they have germs too. Then they're coming in your house and it's just your house. They're not, nothing's being sterilized. Nothing's being clean, So yeah, I can think the same now, but I was in the same shoes back then too. I thought the same thing. I was like, oh yeah, it's better. It's not as germy. And then now being in the hospital, having babies later, I was like, oh yeah, completely different. Completely different.